Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. And welcome to this special broadcast brought to you by the Al Barakah Forum for Islamic Economy. You are watching us live this Sunday afternoon from Johannesburg here in South Africa on Hilal TV, as well as Al Barakah Bank South Africa and Al Barakah Forum's YouTube and Facebook live streaming, and the Zoom virtual platform for Al Barakah Forum. The topic is Islamic economy around the world, and the focus for today's program is on South Africa. Now, let me commence by giving you some background into the South African context. After decades of apartheid, preceded by European colonialism and a culture of racism, South Africa ushered in the democratic era in the early 1990s. Mandela's renowned Rainbow Nation commenced with the first democratic elections in '94. Despite the challenges of racism and apartheid, the Muslim community in South Africa during the apartheid era had achieved in a significant way, from religious infrastructure to education and other such examples. The advent of democracy in the 90s brought with it many exciting opportunities for the Muslim community in South Africa, but it also brought with it the challenge of modifying approach. And the Muslim community at the time, especially the leadership, had realized that there had to be adjustments to the approach in order to cater for the evolving needs of the community in the new democratic era, as well as to plan adequately for the future. As an example, in the 80s, during the last years of the apartheid regime, Sharia marriages were not recognized. Islamic finance was not recognized, at times perhaps not even acknowledged or permitted. If you fast forward 30 years from the early 90s, when democracy was ushered in, and Mandela's vision of Rainbow Nation had commenced, to where we are here now in the year 2023, as an example of the achievement of the South African Muslim community from an economic perspective, the population of the country now is about 59 million people, approximately, and 2%, give or take, is the population of Muslims within the borders of South Africa. Now, in terms of achievement within our borders, 30 years after democracy, I'll quote to you one example. In 2022, according to data from the Banking Association of South Africa, the deposits in South Africa's halal banking are in excess of $3 billion. That's 61 billion rands. And the advances amount to about $1.1 billion. That's about 22 million rands. Staggering for a community that small in a country with the history of South Africa. Then if you take another example, halal, the global or the developed halal industry, if you look at it from that perspective, South Africa is considered to be one of the most advanced halal certification practices on the African continent. And the country is among the top 5 halal product producing countries worldwide. Some estimates suggest that $3.2 billion is the value of the halal industry in South Africa. So more of that will be unpacked as we talk to our guests on the program. But let me first tell you a little bit more about the Al Barakah Forum for Islamic Economy. That's the host of the program this afternoon. They are an independent, non-profit global think tank, and they specialize in Islamic economy in a holistic sense. The forum emerged as an extension of the founder, Sheikh Saleh Abdullah Kamal, whose research covered various areas of the Islamic economy. So we are honored to invite to the discussion today leading experts from Islamic banking and finance, the halal industry, as well as Islamic NPOs. Let me begin by introducing our guest this afternoon. First, we have Mr. Shabir Chauhan. He's the Chief Executive of Al Barakah Bank Limited, South Africa. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Then we've got Mrs. Fayrouz Mohammed, National Chairperson of the South African National Zakat Fund, known as SENZAF. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa barakatuh. Jazakallah Maulana.
Mr. Zainul Abidin Kaji is the co-founder and ex-CEO of the National Awqaf Foundation of South Africa, known in short as Awqaf SA. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And finally, we've got Maulana Muhammad Saeed Navlaki, who's the Theological Director of the South African National Halal Authority, known as SENHA. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So, viewers, we're going to focus first on financial services, Al Barakah Bank, and we've got the CEO, as we mentioned, Mr. Shabir Chauhan, with us. Shabir, tell us about the advent of Islamic financial services and banking in South Africa. I know it's a long history, but in a nutshell.
Maulana, I think first we must thank Sheikh Saleh, the late Sheikh Saleh, for bringing Islamic banking into the country. and also to Sheikh Yusuf Kalawi, who is quite involved with the Al Barakah Forum. In 1975, there was an organization that started off Islamic banking products that unfortunately was not too successful. In 1988 or 89, there was a failed Islamic bank that was established. Unfortunately, that folded. But I think we must thank the advocate A.B. Muhammad, senior counsel. He was instrumental in bringing a sustainable solution of Islamic banking into the country. That was in 1989 when Al Barakah was established. And in 1997, there was the first Sharia compliant unit trust. So that's the background of where Islamic banking products started off in this country.
25 or 30 years from then, how would you say, what's your evaluation of the change in the landscape when it comes to Islamic finance and banking? How much has changed since then?
I think, Maulana, significantly. I think in the earlier years, with only one financial institution, a fully fledged Islamic bank, the growth has been very pedestrian until probably 2004, when there were other players that came into the market. There were other institutions, the bigger banks. 2004, 2005, 2006, there were 3 new players that came into the market. And I think that's when the growth significantly increased. 2016, there was another institution that came into the market, and 2023. So the top 4 banks in the country have got Islamic windows. The figures that you mentioned, currently at the end of March, as per the Banking Association, there's 60 billion rands in deposits, 21 billion rands in advances. The figures are small relatively to the size of the market, constituting just 0.1% of the total deposits. However, in terms of the unit trust industry, that market is the whole Sharia compliant unit trust industry, something like between 25 and 30 billion rands. So I think there's significant progress that has been made over the years, but still a long way to go, taking into account the relative size of the Muslim population in the country.
But I think, if we look at it from a practical perspective, in the last 30 years, right, South African Muslims have an option, whether it be in the form of Al Barakah Bank or whether it be in the form of Islamic finance within the major commercial banks. From your current account to your credit card, to home loans, to car finance, and everything else can be done in a Sharia compliant way with no hassle.
So there's opportunities. I think 30 years later, there's no reason why someone cannot go and engage in financial compliant products, whether it's savings, whether it's transactional account, as you indicated. And I think you got to remember that South Africa has got a very sophisticated banking system. The opportunities that's available for every single person to engage in that is unlimited. So yes, you're quite right. However, the percentage of people, in my opinion, that are banking on a Sharia basis could be 10 to 20%. So the other 70, 80%, because of historical reasons, they're probably staying with the old financial institutions. But there's a great opportunity in that regard for the industry to grow.
Has government played its part?
I think significantly. If you have a look at it, government has been, living in South Africa, the government has been very positive for growing Islamic banking in the country. Let me give you a couple of examples. The first is, you have a look at the Income Tax Act. Section 24J of the Income Tax Act talks about Islamic finance. Here we have in our South African legislation. Then you have a look at, for unit trust. At one stage, we were possibly sitting in a Sharia meeting for the unit trust, where you have the Sharia chairman at that stage, it was Mufti Taqi Usmani, indicated approach the authorities to see if you can deduct impermissible income at source. We said that's impossible. Fortunately, we approached the authorities, and now in the country, any Sharia compliant unit trust, the impermissible income is deducted at source.
Wow.
So that's something then in the legislation. You have the government has issued a sovereign sukuk in 2014 for $500 million. That was oversubscribed by 4 times. You're having the Reserve Bank issuing a sukuk for an Islamic institution, mobilizing something like 400 million rands that's available. You got something called COFI, that's a conduct of financial institutions. They're trying to regularize what constitutes Sharia investments. So the list goes on. So government, yes, there are limitations, but they've done a significant amount of work in terms of supporting the industry.
You spoke earlier about opportunities, right? What can we look forward to with regards to Islamic banking and Islamic finance as South African citizens? What's in the pipeline? What's on the horizon?
The issue that comes in is that whilst I'm saying there's progress been made by the South African government, the South African Banks Act, as an example, there's no reference to Islamic banking at all. That creates challenges. Create challenges in the sense that you've got to invest in treasury bills, you've got to take that income, donate it to charity, etc. But it is quite encouraging that government currently is looking at a domestic sukuk. This sukuk was meant to have been rolled out in 2020. Unfortunately, with COVID, that was put to a stop. But I do understand from National Treasury that if they do roll out this sovereign sukuk running into several billions of rands, it will change the landscape even further in the country. Other aspects that is being looked at, as I mentioned, COFI, conduct of financial institutions, is more to regularize some of the schemes that have failed in the country, what can be considered to be Sharia compliant, how do you have formality. So those are some of the issues that's coming across. But the biggest challenge is the regulatory side, which takes a long time to address.
All right, time for our first break. When we come back, inshallah, we continue this very enlightening and interesting discussion. Welcome back to this special broadcast brought to you by the Al Barakah Forum. The focus is on Islamic economy around the world. And today we're particularly taking a look at South Africa. Prior to the break, we're talking Islamic finance with Shabir Chauhan from Al Barakah Bank, South Africa. Now we focus on the non-profit sector with, firstly, Sister Feroz Mohammed, whom we introduced in the last segment, chairperson of SENZEF. Okay, so take us through the non-profit components of the Islamic economy in South Africa. What are the kind of activities that a non-profit entity would be engaged?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Jazakallah Maulana. So in an Islamic economy, we've got to contextualize it based against its objectives, which would be establishing justice, attaining fairness, promoting Islamic values, etc. And within establishing these objectives is where the model or the social aspect of the Islamic economy comes through, which is the non-profit sector. And when we look at the non-profit sector, for example, we look at zakah, which is that mandatory charity that Muslims have to give, considering the certain conditions are met. Then we look at waqf, which Brother Zainul will go and speak a little bit more in detail. We have Qard al-Hasan, which is basically a benevolent loan where there is loans granted where there is no component of riba. We also have Islamic microfinance. So there are various components within the non-profit elements within Islamic economy. And the activities around, and I'll basically speak about from a zakah perspective, because as the national chair of SENZEF, that is where basically our focus is. And if we look at certain activities, so we have, for example, the collection, which is ensuring that the donors, who is called the muzaki, has easy access or easy processes of paying their zakah. We have quite a lot of SENZEF's focus is on advocacy, educating the muzaki around, the principles, maqasid of zakah, and exactly how to calculate it, because we find that the communities aren't really familiar with the topic of zakah. It is a pillar of Islam, but a very much neglected one. And that's why we focus a lot on advocacy, especially during the month of Ramadan, because we find that many communities Muslims pay their zakah during the month of Ramadan. We also have what we call from the distribution aspect, where we have the assessment eligibility aspect, where ensuring that there are kind of guidelines as to when engaging with a mustahiq, who is the recipient, getting some information, etc. And with that, we also have the disbursement, which could either be social welfare as well as social development. And our approach has shifted through the years of more project or program development, where the objective and maqasid of zakah is to transform and to eventually move the condition of that mustahiq from a continuous and perpetual handout to educating and giving them a skill so that they can become self-sufficient and self-sustainable at the end of the day. And all these non-profit activities will be with the objective of ensuring the dignity of the mustahiq is maintained and ultimately pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So like you mentioned, the SENZEF, the core focus, the core area of activity is zakah. In your opinion, has the institutionalization of zakah been effectively implemented in South Africa? What are the challenges around that?
So zakah is an important financial and institutional framework which provide social justice, social prosperity, social upliftment, ultimately for the needy and for the most vulnerable. We know that we encourage individuals to pay their zakah individually, and especially to their families first. But there is a premise that we reference in terms of contributing towards organization or an institution, with the benefits of resource pooling, with the benefits of that independent assessment, as well as the greater impact. If you're giving, for example, 2,000 Rand to an individual, as opposed to an organization who has pooled those resources, where you can pay bursaries, for example. And if I look at South Africa, there are a number of zakah institutions that fall under the mandate of the collection and distribution. And alhamdulillah, the beneficiaries are really benefiting through these organizations, whether they have assisted in terms of, and they have assisted in the alleviation of poverty, assist in certain programs, etc. And that doesn't come without challenges. If I look at just two very basic challenges, a lot of criticism we generally get is around, lack of coordination, which results in unplanned distribution or haphazard distribution, lack of transparency, governance, and the one that we usually tend to highlight is the lack of a regulatory body. There isn't a regulatory body in South Africa, so there's no assessment, there's no monitoring, there's no evaluation. and which at the end of the day result in no accountability. So organizations can pop up, like I said, in the month of Ramadan, and nobody's held to account. So even though, and we cannot outweigh the challenges that that there are, it doesn't outweigh the good that these organizations do, but we cannot ignore these challenges. They exist. However, we need to ensure that somehow we regulate this industry, whether they implement basic or minimum standards of good governance, with the objective of ensuring that the vulnerable and the needy are, their rights are upheld.
We spoke in the previous segment to Shabir about the developments in South Africa around Islamic finance. Has that impacted on the awareness of religious obligations with regards to wealth, and particularly with regards to zakah?
That's a very important question, because I do think if we look at historically, as a Muslim consumer, we were engaged in the conventional banking. Now, if you look at the banking sector, if you look at, and Brother Shabir mentioned the top 5 banks, they have all Islamic windows, except that we have one fully fledged Islamic bank. So now, in terms of the conscious Muslim wanting to ensure that they comply with Sharia compliance, they cannot now say they don't have options. They may not, I think, fully understand, and be aware of all the options they have available. But I think now the conscious Muslim cannot say they don't have options. And because of that mindset of the Muslim or the conscious Muslim opting for more Sharia compliant instrument in terms from a banking perspective, so too do they become more conscious about the aspect of zakah. And I must maybe indicate that during the month of Ramadan, Baraka Bank and SANS have actually collaborated with it was such an easy but an important aspect where they utilize their debit order system to pay their fitra. So those are kind of collaborations that I think, and ideas where the consciousness of, from a Sharia Islamic banking sector, somehow affects the consciousness of Muslims to be able to pay their zakah as well.
Well, let's talk specifically about waqf, Brother Zain al-Abidin. For those who are not familiar with the term, in layman's terms, what is waqf?
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think the whole concept of waqf, if we look at the origins of it from the time of the Prophet ﷺ in Medina, the word waqf really doesn't even appear in the charitable sense in the Quran, but the word sadaqah jariyah appears, in the hadith and so forth. But waqf, the literal meaning of waqf is actually to stop, to stand still, to halt, and you find this in all the stop streets in the Middle East with the word waqf or qif. But from a Sharia perspective, the whole idea of giving from a voluntary perspective, a voluntary charity dedicated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a Sharia compliant purpose. So bequeath the asset and utilize the usufruct. So in a sense, if one were to talk about it metaphorically, it's about a tree and fruits. So the tree becomes the waqf, and the fruits become the usufruct, which can be utilized and be sold and be distributed. Sorry, to enable beneficiaries to benefit out of that. So in a sense, that's basically the meaning of waqf.
How challenging is it to cultivate an understanding of an Islamic concept like that in a non-Muslim country like South Africa?
Okay, I think our target market, so to say, are the Muslim community. So I think the major challenge is since the understanding of waqf hasn't been there, although historically speaking, we've seen waqfs in South Africa. Say, for example, the Grey Street Mosque in Durban, it's got shops around it, and there's rental income that's produced out of that, and they support a lot of other institutions in and around Durban. We've got examples like the Nurul Islam Plaza. We've got examples of the Rustenburg Mosque Plaza. But I think, in a sense, the notion of waqf hasn't really sort of been integrated into our psyche, into our culture. People do talk about sadaqah jariyah and so forth, but I think when we talk about the commercial side of Waqf, it hasn't really penetrated the Muslim community. So the challenge is actually of educating people, of creating more awareness. We don't even find it actually in our madrasa syllabi, for example. We may be talking about charity, but because Waqf is such a specialized form of charity in Islam, I think it needs to be given a lot more prominence, although it's not a compulsory charity, as a voluntary charity that has been sort of embedded within Islamic culture from the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And also, you know, that the Sahaba, it is said that almost every Sahaba that had some form of wealth had made waqfs. So in terms of our history and our culture, it's really deeply, deeply embedded. And we've got deep roots about the waqf system.
In the world that we live in today, considering our current dynamics, why is Waqf strategic and advantageous as a form of charity, specifically for South Africans and in general?
I think that the idea of civil society giving and in the Islamic notion of spending in the way of Allah in so many verses in the Quran, and we find that charity within Islam is a major factor, and for South Africans in particular, I think we find this all the time, that whenever there's a call for any disaster or any emergency requirement, Muslims do come forward. But I think the issue of sustainability is the important part within Islam. Waqf is sacred, Waqf is sustainable, it's more enduring, and I think it's very powerful, because when one looks at the development of the whole Waqf sector, from the Al-Azhar University to all the Al-Azhar schools throughout the world, we find the Sultan Fatih universities, libraries, hospitals, you know, the homes for the aged and so forth. All these, and even mosques, are supported by commercial assets that are Waqf assets. And this is what we need to actually be doing, that we to promote this whole system. We must understand that the Waqf system was decimated during the colonial era. I mean, in many parts of the world, either Waqfs were nationalized, land was actually, there was land grabbing taking place in Tunisia and Morocco and other places. So we find that we're in a situation that the Waqf system needs to be revived. And so, inshallah, that's something that we need to do.
Inshallah. Time again for a break. When we come back, we're going to be focusing now on the halal industry. Welcome back to this special broadcast brought to you by the Al Barakah Forum, which focuses on Islamic economies around the world. The focus today and for this program is South Africa. Thus far, we've spoken about Islamic banking in South Africa with Shabir Chauhan from Al Barakah Bank. We've spoken about the NPO non-profit sector with Feroz Mohammed from Sanzef and Zainul Abidin Kaji from Awqaf SA. Now the focus turns to halal certification and the halal industry. Part of our panel, we have the theological director of Sanham, and that is Maulana Muhammad Saeed Navlaki. So Maulana, let's go to the beginning. Halal certification, when was it introduced and how was it introduced in South Africa?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, nahmaduhu wa nusalli wa nusallim ala rasulih al-kareem, ma ba'd. We must understand that prior to the 1950s and 60s, there was no halal certification anywhere in the world. Although the halal imperative and the injunction was there always. Due to various factors, South Africa seen the need in the early 60s to introduce halal certification. So we are amongst the oldest in the world, alhamdulillah. The first halal certification body was established in the Cape, the Muslim Judicial Council. And then the halal certification activity of the Jamiatul Ulama Transvaal started in around the late 60s. Started with the red meat abattoirs at the time because that was the need. Everybody slaughtered their own poultry in their homes. And all other food products, I mean, 50, 60 years ago, there was no buying a yogurt or a loaf of bread from the shops. Everything was baked at home and made at home. And as the years went on, the need for halal certification grew nationally and beyond just our borders. If we look at the 1980s, we introduced halal certification of poultry abattoirs. And that wasn't because the community stopped slaughtering at home. It was purely because that the Muslim businessmen embarked into the FMCG industry in the late 70s, early 80s. And they had a need to sell halal poultry, frozen poultry in their businesses. So it evolved, although that was the objective at the time, it evolved where every household today buys their, their fillets and their poultry directly from the industry. Nobody slaughters at home anymore, illa masha'Allah. So that's how things have evolved. And in the late 80s, a lot of research was done beyond the sphere of the meat industry. And we then embarked into looking at various other facets of the food industries and the critical areas in every industry. And alhamdulillah, today you see almost every segment of the halal industry is being regulated by the halal certification bodies. Areas, from ingredients to manufacturing aids to the equipment that is used, where there is a huge possibility of non-halal components coming in. The other day, somebody spoke about toothpicks, as you mentioned earlier. We were sitting at a dinner table and they said, oh, I see the Sanha also certifies toothpicks. Now, it's a people don't understand. But that's exactly what we said 18 years ago when the guy walked into the office and said, I want my toothpick certified. And we said, it's neutral. It's a wood item. Why do you need certification for it? But he then responded saying, look, let me teach you people something. It needs certification. because the wood is coated either with beeswax or with an animal stearate fat. That was an eye-opening. We immediately wrote to Oral-B, only to find out that the waxed floss uses a beeswax, and the unwaxed floss uses a magnesium stearate of animal fat origin. So, and like that with water. Typically, I mean, you see a bottle of water, why does there need to be a halal certification on it? There's a host of factors besides flavored water where there are critical ingredients in the flavorant material, but even plain water, you know, the filter aids that are used, the carbon material that is used, is it coming from animal bone carbon or is it from a mineral carbon? So there are huge factors that have to be taken into consideration.
Now, I mentioned in my introduction, right, we make up about 2%, give or take, of the 59 million people that reside in South Africa. Yet, halal certification is massive in South Africa in terms of proportion, right? What's behind the success story of halal certification in our country?
We must keep in mind that, you know, unlike other minority Muslims in non-Muslim countries, South Africa has a very mature Muslim community. Our community in South Africa is almost 4 centuries old. We have well integrated into the community. There's tolerance, there's acceptance, there's acknowledgement of the needs of the community. That is one of the main reasons that we find industry understanding our needs. We also have a very, very strong Muslim business component in this country. And Brother Shabir Chauhan's banking will tell you a lot about how strong the Muslim community is in this country in terms of its financial capacity and its trade component. Our traders make up in the FMCG sector, almost 30% is made up by Muslim traders. So there is a demand, you know, unlike others, and unfortunately you even see it in Muslim countries, other non-Muslim countries, where Muslims will have a halal restaurant and still sell liquor. In South Africa, the Muslim community are very, very conscious and aware about what they can and cannot do, and Muslim traders will not sell non-halal in their businesses. And that has led to where we are with regards the strength of halal in this part of the world.
Early on, Feroz spoke about the NPO sector and that there isn't enough regulation, anyone can start, there isn't enough oversight, etc. What's the legal framework in South Africa when it comes to halal certification?
There is no legal framework per se. Like with any other NPO, as long as you go and you register yourself, or even if you're not an NPO, private organizations can go and register themselves and start off halal certification. So there unfortunately isn't legal framework like in any other non-Muslim country. And South Africa being a secular state, you know, the state doesn't want to get involved in religious affairs really. And there's a good side to it and a negative side to it as well. So there's positives and negatives to it. But in South Africa, there is no legal framework. However, having said that, the community representatives and leading organizations in the country have been part and in the fore of this. So we've managed to stem non-entities getting into the field and just certifying for the sake of purely monetary reasons. In South Africa, it's not like that. We've got community representative organizations doing certification, which is a big plus. And then on the international arena, there is a level of regulation that is coming in, which is going to stem out those that are incompetent, or they're going to separate the men from the boys, because countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, UAE are now not only insisting that you must be competent bodies, they in fact come out and audit your systems to ensure that you know, there's compliance and that you have systems in place to avoid poor certification, fraudulent certification, and lack of integrity in the service of halal.
Time now for our final break. When we come back, inshallah, we move towards the concluding remarks and some of the questions that have come in from our viewers. Welcome back to the final segment of this special broadcast brought to you by the Al Barakah Forum. Their focus is on Islamic economies around the world. The focus of today's program is on the economy, Islamic economy here in South Africa. Shabir, we spoke earlier on, in the very first segment about Islamic finance. How appealing is Sharia compliant financial products to non-Muslims globally, but more specifically in South Africa as well?
I think it is a bit difficult. The reason being that there's so many options available. There's other institutions. If you go across and you're trying to market Islamic products, someone is going to question as to the reasons why they should. I think sometimes we are our greatest enemies. We name products very complex names. When the non-Muslims look at it, they don't understand it. But saying that, I think there's also an understanding that we should move away from Islamic financial products or Sharia compliant products, but more ethical products. And that resonates with the communities when we have products that are not involved in alcohol, not involved in tobacco, not involved in some of the vices, etc. Then you're getting people coming to invest. But at this point in time, it's in the minority. But in some institutions, I do kind of believe that they have a significant number of non-Muslim customers. But in that, there's definitely an opportunity. And even in the unit trust industry, if you have a look at that particular companies, significant number of investors are voting or investing on that basis.
Now, one of the questions coming in from one of the viewers, can you share experience in the practice of integrating of Islamic social finance in the framework of financial inclusion and well-being with valuable impact on poverty alleviation?
In South Africa, we have a major problem. Poverty is something that's creating a lot of challenges in the country. And we've experimented with microfinancing. It's a very difficult and expensive initiative to undertake. At the bank that I'm involved with, we've recently introduced a social responsibility card, a debit card, where we're trying to make it easy for people to benefit from it. For example, that card cannot be used for cash withdrawals. It can't be used in bottle stores. It can't be used in places of vices. It can only be used in certain areas of businesses. And it's becoming very popular. So that will probably assist the people out there to play a role. But it's something that we have to learn. I don't think we've mastered it. And perhaps if it's coming from overseas, we need to look at more what the overseas model is. We do look at some of the other countries, but we haven't been that successful at this point in time.
Feroz, a question from one of the viewers. How has fintech assisted in making it easier for a person to discharge their zakah?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Shukran Maulana, from a South African perspective, and I think that's where the context would be coming from. I must say fintech has played a significant role, and I think it will continue to play a significant role in facilitating zakah payments. If you're looking at from everybody using their smartphones, if you look at from a mobile app perspective, even Sanzib has a zakah app. So to be able to even calculate your zakah, it stores your information, it calculates, assists in assets that are zakatable, which gives you that option of, oh, I didn't realize I needed to pay on my jewelry, which would be my Kruger coin, for example, or jewelry, etc. We also have online calculators. So Sanzib also has an online calculator on their website. We also have, obviously, which generally we've had before, which is the online payment system through your banking system as well. And then there are possible crowdfunding technologies that people use in terms of discharging their zakah. What doesn't happen in South Africa is the automated zakah deduction. For example, if you look at countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, where your zakah gets deducted from your bank account automatically. Inshallah, I hope that will happen in our country very soon, because you look at the potential of zakah, that we're not reaching in terms of the distribution and the poverty that is within this country. And Brother Shabir has mentioned, from a 61 billion perspective of the deposits that there are. And if you're looking at just from a zakah potential perspective, we've done the calculation and it's potentially around 1.52 billion rand of zakah that needs to be collected. And if we looked at the top 5 nonprofits that collect zakah, we're close to only about 500 to 700 million. So you can see the potential of the impact that we could make if people actually pay their zakah. And we're making it much more easier. Fintech is making it so much more easier as an enabler to discharge your zakah.
Then, I mean, we spoke about the NPO sector, both in terms of zakah and waqf from the organizational perspective and the Muslim community perspective. In terms of the broader socio-economic situation in South Africa, and we know that South Africa stands as the most unequal society globally, what would you say has been the contribution of the likes of SANZAF and Awqaf SA and others working in the sector towards poverty alleviation, towards contributing in as far as the socio-economic challenges facing the country as a whole is concerned?
I think that if you look at our whole NPO sector, there's been undoubtedly significant contribution. I think that in almost every sort of catastrophe, one would find Muslims in the forefront. And I think that speaks quite loudly about Muslim contribution in South Africa. We actually once also tried to initiate a Muslim community social investment survey, but I think that that might be something that we could still do. And just as Feiruz has mentioned now, that there's been there is a significant amount collected in terms of zakah, but there's a significant amount that's also collected as sadaqah or lillah and also as waqf. So all these combined actually contribute significantly to poverty alleviation. For example, when we had the riots and the looting that took place in 2021, Muslims were in the forefront, providing bread, providing water, and a host of other requirements. So I think there has been, on the one hand, a lot of relief work that goes on. Boreholes are sunk almost everywhere throughout the country by various organizations, Crescent of Hope, Awqaf South Africa, SANZAF, and others. In fact, Gift of the Givers is a significant player as well in this area, assisting hospitals. And now with load shedding and even water shedding that we're experiencing, I think more and more happens all the time. But overall, I think, and like you mentioned, from a significantly small community, there is much that is happening. Unfortunately, not all of this gets broadcast in media. And I think that we need to actually get some form of coordination of all the things that happen on the ground, so that the public and especially the powers that be get to know about what we're doing.
I think it's an important point you mentioned. Like, for example, Imtiaz Suleiman of Gift of the Givers is so appreciated amongst non-Muslims for the work that they do in poverty alleviation and socioeconomic challenges, that many want him to become the next president of the country. Yes,
absolutely.
Malal, the issue of halal certification, what are the challenges currently in your space, and how do you assess that space going forward? What should we be looking at from an Islamic halal certification perspective in terms of being well prepared for what the future holds?
I think we firstly have to be aware of the fact that there's increasingly reports of fraud that are coming in with regards to halal certification. So fraudulent certification locally and internationally is something that is a major challenge that regulators have to find ways and means of curbing. And secondly, there is a dearth. Really, there's such a shortage of Muslim scientists and food technologists, and this is not only in South Africa, but more in South Africa than Muslim countries would still have. But non-Muslim countries where there are Muslim minorities, unfortunately, this field is hugely neglected, and we definitely have to find ways and means of encouraging our youth to pursue careers in this regard, and also investing, from our business segment into this area. If you look at what is happening in the world, I mean, whether you look at GMOs or whether you look at lab-grown meat products, or the move towards products that are trending, whether it be your energy drinks or your CBD products, etc. we don't have people that can give us clear answers, with regards what is the reality that is happening. And what scientists do today, governments come to know 10 years later, and before there's regulation, it's 20 years have passed, and the product's already in the market, and you don't know about it, even though you may be consuming it. So we definitely need a huge investment in that segment where we can have scientists leading us.
We've got 3 minutes left, so we'll just go to some concluding remarks. Shabib?
Well, I think from my side, the Islamic economy in South Africa is very interesting. It's about 100 billion at this point in time. We want, as some of the organizations we're involved in, to see how we can increase that to 200 billion. There is an inaugural meeting of an association this week, Thursday, that's taking place to get the unit trust industry, the banking industry, very importantly, the takaful industry, which is Islamic insurance, is in an embryonic stage, but that's a next massive growth in the country.
Feroz?
Shukran Maulana, I think the theme that I got from the panelists today, and maybe something that I maybe want to mention, is around the social prosperity. If I look at in terms of the nonprofit sector, that is ultimately the objective, is to ensure social prosperity for those most vulnerable and those most needy. And at the end of the day, the objective is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but to ensure that we uphold the right of those who are most needy and most vulnerable through, from a zakah perspective, paying their zakah. Inshallah.
We'd like to see more growth in the Waqf sector. We'd like to see more programs, educational programs from mosques, from madrasas, from schools, reaching out to community. We'd like to see more integration between the Islamic finance industry and Awqaf in terms of financing Waqf assets. We'd like to see that segment actually growing in leaps and bounds. There's ample opportunities for that as well. I think internationally, the Islamic Development Bank, they have a separate arm for Awqaf property investment, and they do sort of leverage funding for Waqf properties. I think that's an area that needs to be developed, and that has tremendous potential.
I think, from a halal regulatory or certification perspective, I think it's very important that all segments, whether it be our Muslim governments, whether it be our regulators, or whether it be the Muslim businessmen, the primary motivation must at all times be the divine obligation and the religious imperative. Yes, there is a huge pecuniary gain factor and a financial factor attached to it. I mean, the halal industry is worth several trillion rands today internationally, but we must keep in mind the divine obligation in all facets of our life.
Absolutely, and that should remain our core focus and objective, pleasing Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala and upholding the values of our pristine deen. It's 3 p.m. GMT, spot on, time for us to conclude. Time always goes very quickly when you're having an interesting discussion, but I hope it was of benefit, inshallah, and the first of many more to come. To all the viewers out there, fi amanillah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.